Hello there, I'm back in the study tonight, although for some reason the chandelier overhead is kind of strobing a little bit more than usual, hence a strange effect. Anyway, this is episode 4 in my series debunking the moon landing conspiracy theory, taking the historical approach rather than the scientific and engineering one, which I think is covered very well on other websites and YouTube channels. So tonight I want to talk about Wernher von Braun and what he was up to in the Antarctic. What prompted me to do this one was a debate I heard a few years ago between the space scientists and the facilitator over at the Bad Astronomy website you should check out, by the way, it's really good. So Phil Plait on one side, speaking up for the moon landings and Apollo, and his opponent was the political commentator and comedian Joe Rogan, and they were on Penn Jillette's radio show. It's all on YouTube. You can find this debate easily enough, and you can listen to it yourselves, see what you think. Now, Joe Rogan's an interesting character to me. I quite like his show. I listen to it occasionally. He has some very good guests on, and he talks about some really interesting current affairs and social commentary. And I appreciate what he does. He's a very active intellect. He's obviously a voracious reader, an information hound. He loves just kind of coming across all kinds of different stories, facts, opinions, history, science. He's a mishmash, really. If I have a criticism of his, is that he doesn't filter what he reads or hears about enough. Hence, for a while he bought into the moon landing conspiracy theory. I think he's changed now. I think he actually believes the moon landings were real. It's just that the photographs that were taken on the moon were faked, which I think he's wrong about as well. I saw a fairly recent show of his where he's talking about a Gemini 10 photo which he thinks was faked, and I happen to know it hasn't been faked. It's genuine. It's just he's taking it in the wrong context. But a few years ago he believed in the conspiracy theory, and he really took Phil Plait to task in one of the radio debates. Plait did very well in the other two, but in this one Rogan completely wrong-footed him and won the debate, in my opinion. I think in a lot of other people's opinions, I think Phil Plait recognised he didn't do well in this debate either. Now, what happened was that Plait went in wanting to talk about the science and engineering, and Rogan threw him a curveball, which was the visit of Wernher von Braun to Antarctica in 1967. Rogan's claim was that von Braun was up to no good. It was a secret mission to the Antarctic, and von Braun, a Nazi, and we all have to punch Nazis, when we see them. They don't even have to do anything to us, we just have to punch them. Rogan was saying because von Braun was a Nazi, he was up to no good, and his actual mission was to find moon rocks in the Antarctic, because geologists know that tiny moon rocks can be found in the Antarctic as a legacy of millions of years ago. The bombardment of the lunar surface by meteors and asteroids broke off pieces of the moon, and they made their way to the Earth, and they can be found in small quantities in the Antarctic. Well, there's so much wrong with Rogan's argument here, but Plait knew nothing about von Braun's trip to the Antarctic. He was left floundering. Now, I knew about this trip because, as luck would have it, when I was at high school in the 1980s, my school library had a copy of Scientific American, or it could have been National Geographic magazine. It was one of those respected tomes, and the story was covered there. It was an old back issue from 1968, and it chronicled in photographs and in text von Braun's visit, and it explained the reasons why he was there, and it was in the full glare of publicity. So it wasn't a top secret mission. Von Braun wasn't surprised to find that there was a National Geographic or Scientific American photography team present at Scott Amundsen Base in the Antarctic. He knew they were there because they travelled with him. It was a publicised visit. And von Braun wasn't there to look for moon rocks. It's a bit silly to if you want to find moon rocks in the Antarctic, and none had been found before 1972. It was actually a team of Japanese geologist who had found the first moon rocks in the Antarctic in 1972. So von Braun is a rocket engineer. He's not a geologist. So what would he be looking for? Would he know what he was looking for? And he's the most famous scientist associated with Apollo at that time. You know, he was a public figure. Controversial figure in many ways, but still a public figure. He was well known. And so why do you send your most famous scientist to go and look for rocks when he's not a geologist? He's a rocket scientist. So this is logic fail, big time, from the conspiracy theorists. I'm surprised Rogan didn't critically think about that. He's got a lot better over the years, I've got to say. Now he's quite sharp. Back then he was swallowing any kind of wild theory. So von Braun was there, actually, and he was accompanied by other high-ranking NASA officials. I think Bob Gilruth and George Mueller were there as well with him. I may have got the names wrong there, but there were other high-profile NASA engineers and administrators on this trip. And the reason they were going there, well, there were two. One, they were getting a free trip to the Antarctic paid for by the US government, so it's called a boondoggle, I think is the term for that. And the second one was the reason was that Scott Amundsen Base in the Antarctic is a hermetically sealed living environment for engineers and scientists, and they've got to be living in this kind of very protective, self-contained environment. And von Braun thought that would be useful for designing space stations. This was what he was envisaging after Apollo. One of the Apollo applications would be building a space station that would later become Skylab. So that's the reason why he was there. But why people latch onto this von Braun story is von Braun's past. They focus on the Nazi aspect. So here's a very brief summary of von Braun's career. So in the late 1920s, when he's a teenager, he becomes obsessed with rocketry. This is before the Nazis take power. We're in Weimar, Germany here. So he starts working in the late 1920s and early 1930s on rocket design as a teenager. And he works with Hermann Berth, who's the leading rocket engineer of the time. Nazis come to power in 1933. Von Braun joins the Nazi Party in 1937, mainly because they're the only show in town. They've outlawed all other political parties, and you don't get anywhere without Nazi blessing, and von Braun's working in cutting-edge science and engineering, and so the Nazis are the only way he's going to get ahead. This is von Braun's opportunism. He is faced with a situation, and he adapts. We see this throughout his career. So he goes to work for the Nazi military in World War II, because that's what you do if you're a rocket engineer in the war, and Hitler decides that these are going to be the new super weapons. He's going to indulge von Braun. Now, von Braun did oversee rocket production, which involved slave labor. This is where the real controversy comes in, because he rose to the rank of SS Major, or he was given an SS rank in 1943, and he oversees production of the rockets, which use slave labor, and people are worked to death, and the atrocities were committed in these factories. Now, whether he ordered them or not is unknown, but he was aware of them. He was aware that this happened, and he just kept working on rockets anyway. So after the war, he's interned by the Americans. He actually flees Nazi. When the whole regime's crumbling, he goes west, and he surrenders himself to the Americans. And as community service, his punishment is go and work for the US government building rockets, which is what he wants to do anyway. So this is a man who pretty much dedicates his entire professional life to building rockets that can go into space. That's all he cares about, and he will side with whichever regime, whichever country is going to get in there. And it seems a little bit odd that a man who's developed all his professional adult life into building things that can actually go into space, actually go to the moon, which is what he wants more than anything else, will suddenly one day decide to go, nah, let's fake it instead. I don't believe it for 1 minute. You know, if von Braun can make a rocket that can go to the moon, he can make a rocket that can go to the moon. Forget about his morals and whether he's a Nazi. You know, doesn't matter. He is going to build a rocket to the moon. Okay, until next time, I'll see you later.